the call of something more fits perfectly with the first little story I have. There was this one evening, after 30 years of spending every night sitting side by side watching television, this husband said to his wife, "We need to change. We need to change. Let's do something exciting." And his words kind of sparked something inside of her. And she had these visions of night out on the town and traveling and seeing new places and taking long walks in the woods, holding hands. And she said, "Absolutely. What shall we do?" And her husband said, "Well, let's swap chairs." He felt the call of something more. So my lesson today is titled "The View from Here." And I really don't mean from a different chair. Right? So I want to start the lesson this morning with a current story that he swapped chairs. He felt called to something better. I'm going to start my lesson today with a story that is unfolding as we speak, and I'm sure all of you have heard pieces of it. And if you haven't, check above your head. You might be living under a rock. And you've probably been there for a few months. Okay, so I want to highlight a person who has been highlighted almost continuously in the world, not Taylor Swift. I know that was your guess, not Taylor Swift, but the world of basketball, and that is Caitlin Clark. Okay, so Caitlin is a woman, if you have been under the rock. She's a woman basketball player who, now that her college career is over, she was at the University of Iowa, and she holds so many NCAA titles and records, such as all-time leading scorer, men or women. She topped the more recent women's record, and then she topped like a 50-year record that had been set by a man. And she's the top three-point shooter, the top three-point maker. She's the top scorer in a single season, and the list just goes on and on and on. And she was selected as the number 1 overall pick in the WNBA draft, if you're paying attention. And as she's starting off with the Indiana Fever, she's already breaking some records as well. And I understand they won their first game a few nights ago, so yay, Caitlin. But basically, she is single-handedly changing the world of basketball for women on all levels. And quite frankly, she's probably changing the world of basketball, period. And as I've watched news coverage about Caitlin Clark and the interviews of this phenomenal athlete, I keep hearing her saying a version of a story that's similar in several interviews, and I find it relevant to our lesson today. So if you listen, she says, I've got 2 quotes. She says something like this in most of the interviews she does where she talks about these new milestones. Her first quote is, "I've dreamed of this moment since I was in 2nd grade. It's taken a lot of hard work, a lot of ups and downs, but more than anything, just believing it was possible." And her second quote is, "This is a dream. This is something I wrote down on a piece of paper when I was like in 2nd grade. Get a basketball scholarship, play in the WNBA. This is something I've always wanted to do." So people are fascinated and charmed that she wrote these things down. And she's often asked about that list that she wrote when she was very young, when she said she wanted to play in the WNBA. And her mom actually kept that little list of goals that 7-year-old Caitlin wrote down, and it's turned out to be more than just a child's wish list, right? So in our monthly discussion that we've been having about moving from good to great to grand, Caitlin is certainly an example of someone who has done just that in her very young life. I mean, the child's only like 23 or something like that. She's very young. But she started playing basketball when she was 5 years old, and along the way, I'm sure you can hear in your head people saying things like this to her. "Man, is she good. She has good basic ball handling skills. She's a good team player. She's good on the court." Somewhere in between kindergarten and 2nd grade, Caitlin had internalized this idea that she was good, and she decided to become great. And the world of basketball was more than willing to participate with her in becoming great. So in the book Good to Great by Jim Collins wrote there's this concept called a BHAG. How many of you read Good to Great? Anybody? One person, yay! 2 people, yay, yay! Okay, so Good to Great, a BHAG. This is what a BHAG is. A BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. Okay? Have you heard of a BHAG, right? What this book does is it insists that in order for a company, an organization, or even an individual to move from being good to great, they've got to have a BHAG. They've got to have a big, hairy, audacious goal. So Caitlin wrote on a piece of paper her BHAG, get a basketball scholarship and play in the WNBA. And then she did the next thing, the next most important thing from the Good to Great author. Jim says this: greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and the D word that we all hate, discipline, right? So Caitlin dedicated the next 15 years to her BHAG. Choice after choice with notable discipline. She moved from that moment to, in her writing tablet at age 7, to the gym, to basketball camps, to the tournaments, to the games, over and over with discipline, practicing win or lose, ups or downs. She let her vision of her future drive her forward to the Caitlin Clark that we all know and watch on our television sets, whichever chair we're sitting in, or in basketball arenas, right? So her story is really not unusual. If you dig into the story of any successful athlete, musician, career professional, expert clinician, lawyer, teacher, basically any profession, in every story you're going to find a person who set a goal, a BHAG for themselves. They tapped into a vision for their life, and then they spent years making many disciplined choices aligned with that vision, moving from being good to something, at being great at something. And the most important part of a BHAG is it must be something that inspires you to move, inspires you to work with others, inspires you to get creative, all with discipline. So we've spent the last couple of weeks, talking about doing our inner work, looking inside to understand those things about ourselves. We look inside to see what moves us, what gets us going, what our values are, who we know ourselves to be. We're spending the year of 2024 having a grand rising. So the question today is, where are you going? What is that good, that point on the horizon that pulls you forward? What is the vision for your life? What is your personal BHAG? And I named the lesson The View from Here because it is here, in this place, here in this moment, that we decide what is going to move us forward into our grand rising. We must have a view of who we are right now. In the life we're living right now, what is the view from here? Because at some point, Caitlin had to look at what? She had to look at her magic suit. She had to look at her physical body. She had to look at her mental abilities, her skills, and her talents, her spirit, and her light, and all those bits of herself that brought her to that moment. And then she had to decide what was here that could move her forward. And she couldn't waste any time wishing for skills and bits and pieces that she didn't have, that weren't here. She had to figure out what was here. What did she have to work with? And we get to do the same thing. None of us are second graders, I get that. But all of us have a future to create moment by moment. Given where you're standing right now, with all the things that your soul has been given to work with, your physical body, your mental abilities, your skills, your talents, your spirit, and your light, same things that Caitlin had. What are yours? What do you see for your future self, given who you know yourself to be right here, right now? What are you going to dedicate your disciplined choices in creating for yourself? How are you going to use what you have to create something greater? What can you possibly see for yourself? And this is a spiritual lesson inside and out. Inside and out. Randy talked about it about Michael Beckwith. I want to tell you what Ernest Holmes, who's the founder of our philosophy, here's what he wrote over 100 years ago. If we have a strong picture or mental concept of what we desire, and we hold to that mental equivalent, regardless of circumstances, Meaning if we hold that dream, no matter what, we must sooner or later manifest according to the concept. He uses the word mental equivalent. So mental equivalent means if you think small, you get small. If you think big, you get big. You have to hold that mental equivalent. And this spiritual lesson is firmly in place in Unity too. I know some of y'all come from Unity. Another new thought, similar teaching that we have. Eric Butterworth, a prolific Unity author, actually wrote it this way. The secret of achieving your dreams lies in so vividly imagining them that you literally exude the consciousness of them. You embody them, in other words. You are vibrating with their reality. It's easy to see that in Caitlin Clark, right? We can see that she did that. Then there's Patanjali, the Hindu author and mystic. He also understood this concept of having a big, hairy, audacious goal. Here's what he said. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. I'm sure you've had that experience before. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. That vision is what wakes all that up inside of you, and what basically Holmes, Butterworth, and Patanjali are saying is they're all affirming that we are creative beings. And when we hold a dream or a goal or an intention firmly in our consciousness, and we allow ourselves to be pulled forward by that dream, we will become greater people, living a greater life. We move from being good right here and right now to living in a great way as we move toward our grandness. So I bet you can look at your own life up until this point. I guarantee you can see where you have lived this principle yourself. You can likely think of dreams that you held when you were little, maybe not a second grader, but some point younger than this, that you had a dream that you are now living. You can also likely think of dreams that you had that you're not living. And if this principle is true, the difference between the ones you lived out and the ones you didn't, that didn't become a reality, the difference is the level of discipline and conscious choosing you did toward whatever dream you are living. So, am I right? Am I right? Okay, just making sure I'm not the only one on this road. Okay, so let me speak to my own examples. Okay, so I can think of a few dreams that I had when I was young girl, that I spoke out loud, that I actually ended up living. So one of them was when I was in the first grade, I told my mom that I wanted to have a child, but I did not want to have a husband. Okay, so as you can imagine, back in 1970-ish or whenever I was in the first grade, my mom basically said something like, well, honey, that's just not how it works, but okay. But somehow, my little mind had a view of my life at that moment of being a parent. Now, I never let go of that dream. And I held it in my mind for 25 more years. And even though there were quite a few obstacles to becoming a mom for me, the fact that I realized I was a lesbian, that was a big old problem. Donor insemination was illegal at the time, and I had infertility issues. In 1995, I stepped into that dream when my daughter was born. I stepped into the dream of being a mom. And I made conscious choice after conscious choice. I didn't care what the obstacles were. I kept marching towards it. Yet I had many other dreams for myself when I was young that I didn't end up living out. One was to be a child psychologist. Didn't happen. And I also wanted to be an attorney. Didn't happen either. I didn't have a strong mental image of those dreams. And I did not choose with discipline the steps that would take me to those dreams. Now, I could certainly go back and say, okay, I'm going to be one of those things, and I could do that. But I'm in a place where I want to look at where I am right now. And what is my dream right now? And how do I take in the view from here? And as I said, I want to stand right where I am today and see the points on my horizon that will pull me forward with inspiration. I want to set some more BHAGs for myself, and I invite you to do the same. Before I share my own current BHAG, let me talk about one of my former clients. So I was talking with this coaching client a few years ago, and he had recently gone through a real troubling divorce, okay, challenging. And his adult children had basically sided with their mom, okay, and to stop talking to him, he was basically kind of outcast from his family because he chose to end their challenging relationship. And the months and years had passed, and he felt very boxed in and controlled by these harsh opinions all around him. He kind of felt frozen. And he was afraid, he was afraid of making the relationships worse. Like, you know, if he talked about something, it would bring up old stuff, it'd be worse. And, but he had this dream. There was even a grandchild in another state that he had never met. So he had this big goal. He had a BHAG to reunite with his family, with his children, somehow, some way. And we'd been doing coaching sessions for a while when his mother suddenly passed. And he was given this huge opportunity to build a bridge with this family, but he was scared. So he journaled about each one of his children, and he pictured how these reunions would happen. I was asking him, what would it feel like? What would that conversation sound like? How would that make you feel? We were visioning it. I wanted him to journal about it and just really capture how he saw these things happening. And he also worked through, what did he have to forgive himself for? What did he have to forgive everybody else for? If he was going to move into this new idea, there was going to have to be some internal change for everybody too. And I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that all of the children were at the memorial of celebration of life, and they're currently in his life today as positive people in his life. So that was his BHAG, the goal that motivated him to have big conversations, to take big risks, to face his fears, big fears of further rejection. You know, he took step by step with discipline and courage. And it all unfolded pretty miraculously, actually. Just kind of, the barriers seemed to just kind of dissolve. And he took a disciplined approach to his vision. So that was his BHAG. So do you want to know my BHAG, my new BHAG?
Yes.
I'm going to say it, Susan Clark. So it's a big one for sure. So I'm turning 60 in a few weeks. Woo-hoo. That's right. Alternative is not good. And I thought it was a perfect time for me to set a few new BHAGs for myself. And this is mine. My BHAG is, and I'm not going to get emotional, my BHAG is to give my body peace. To give my body peace, just as it is. That I am a normal human being, and I don't have to live my life fighting my body constantly to be something it is not. To see myself as good enough at my age as I am. I no longer wish to be at war with my body, with my self-image and all that stuff. My goal is to silence the inner critic that is constantly on my shoulder. Please tell me I'm not alone. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So, I think as I'm aging, more and more of my BHAGs are about things inside of me and less about things changing or needing something to be different out here. Just maybe you can relate to that. So go on this journey with me as I embrace this new idea that I'm good enough just as I am. So stay tuned. But we're all at different ages. We're all at different ages and different beliefs about what's possible for us, what's possible for the remaining years that we have. You know, that's a whole thing. And we're living out lives in relationship to these limitations that are in our minds. Sometimes these limitations are decisions that we made for ourselves, and some of these limitations were handed to us by other people, and we just swallowed them whole and said, yep, that's my limitation. And sometimes we set limitations by watching what other people are doing and seeing as possible, and they're like, okay, well, that's the limit. Nobody can do better than that. So the question is are these limitations that we're living with, are they real? Do they deserve our respect? Don't cross the line. Or are they just imaginary things that hold us back? So the question is, are there decisions you've made about your own life that deserve another evaluation? Maybe you have decided you're too old to set another BHAG for yourself, or you've decided that you don't have what it takes to reach a point on the horizon that you once thought was desirable. Maybe you second guess your ability to apply the discipline necessary to get to something else. Maybe you're afraid to try, afraid to be disappointed, afraid to look stupid, afraid to be rejected, afraid to reach for something greater. I can relate to all of those, right? But at the same time, in spite of the fears, Maybe you're holding a dream of having something new. Maybe it's a greater relationship. Maybe you want a new skill to improve your quality of functioning in the world. Maybe you desire a better living situation. Maybe you want greater health, or maybe you have a dream of creating something completely new and different. Maybe you know in your heart you want to heal something like I do, something just inside my own thoughts. We've all been there, and I bet we're all there right now, weighing out the dream versus the fears. The great Audre Lorde wrote this: "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I'm afraid." We may all have fear inside of us, but let us never forget. We cannot forget that we have within us the strength and power of our soul. The power of God itself is sitting in there. It's only through allowing that divine strength to live as us, to flow through our choices, to flow through what we have going on in our lives, that we step forward and make disciplined choices consistently. And when we make that decision, the universe conspires, just like it did for Caitlin, to push her forward. So we're stepping into our summer of love next week, y'all. And love is the highest vibrating energy in the world. And that is what flows through us grandly. If we're going to move from good to great to grand, love is what we need. Love of ourselves, love of each other, love of all humankind, love of life. And that entire summer is going to be an invitation to clear away anything that obstructs that love from flowing freely in every part of our lives. Think about it. Is there any part of your life that wouldn't benefit from a huge surge of the most positive energy there is? I don't think so. Any dream that you hold for yourself would manifest more quickly if love was the power that moved you forward. And for me, this is going to be a summer of body love. Body loving, right? So again, you stand here today looking toward your future. What do you see for yourself? What is your vision of your life that you would define as great? And do you see a way of living where your passion and values and defining principles guide your choices? We talked a lot about spiritual practices in Sacred Cup this morning. Use them. They're waiting for you to use them. I'm going to close with a final quote from Jim Collins in Good to Great. When what you are deeply passionate about and what you can do best, you can be best in the world, when those two things come together, not only does your work move towards greatness, but so does your life. For in the end, it is impossible to have a great life unless it's a meaningful life. Perhaps then you might gain that rare tranquility that comes from knowing that you've had a hand in creating something of intrinsic excellence that makes a contribution. Indeed, you might even gain that deepest of all satisfactions, knowing that your short time here on this earth has been well spent and that it mattered. Let's take in a view from here, see a great point on the horizon, and live a life well spent, one that matters. And if the view from here is limiting you, or boring you, or less than big, hairy, and audacious, you may just want to ask your wife to switch chairs every evening.